He is one of the most influential men in Washington, and now anti-tax lobbyist Grover Norquist has set his sights on Virginia's General Assembly and in particular Bob McDonnell's transportation plan. And joining us now from Washington is Grover Norquist to talk more about his issue with Governor McDonnell's transportation plan. Mr. Norquist, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Now, your overall complaint with the plan is that according to your analysis, it will essentially raise taxes on Virginians by about $700 a family. But you do agree that Virginia needs to do more to fund transportation. So where do you think that money should come from?
Well, what Governor McDonnell tried to do for the first 3 years of his governorship was to get the state legislature to make roads a priority, to have that be the first thing they spend money on. What the legislature has said for 3 years, particularly the Democrats and a handful of Republicans in the Senate, was that their lowest priority was transportation, that they would only build more roads and fix the roads we have if taxes were raised, because everything else the state of Virginia spent money on was more important than roads. Unfortunately, in this last year, the governor has agreed to raise taxes. Much of that money goes to Metro, not to roads. Much of that money goes to light rail, which has a long and sad history in other states of not providing additional transportation. And some money would actually get to roads, but it's a rather significant tax increase. And this is the governor's plan. The Democrats in the state Senate have added a great deal of money. I think they want more than $4 billion in higher taxes. And again, very little promise that any of it gets to roads, but they'll take the money. And how many times have we been told they were going to raise taxes and build roads? How many times do we have to be fooled?
So you're saying that the priority should be placed in other places. Do you think that that means that money should come out of some of the primary things that government in Virginia funds, such as schools and education, which is one of the big things Democrats are concerned about money being taken from?
Well, several things. One, there's been more than $1 billion in surplus over the last couple of years. Less than 10% of that went into transportation in any form at all. Why, when you had surpluses, was this not put into roads? It was put into other priorities instead. This is beyond scheduled budgets. Secondly, we really have to take a look in Virginia and other states when they say they're putting money into education, it's going to more bureaucracy. You have to ask, if it's not going into the classroom, don't tell me it's going to education. There needs to be transparency. Virginia is not as transparent a state as others are on how and where spending is made. They could do a lot better. And then voters would have a better idea of how money was being spent. But yes, if you believe roads should be a priority, as a lot of politicians say they do when they want to raise taxes, well then what were you doing in the last 10 years making it your last priority?
You've also been critical of Governor McDonnell's plan to shift from a user-based fee or a gas tax to a slight bump in the sales tax. Why do you think that doesn't work?
Well, if you were doing it on a dollar-for-dollar basis, I suppose that that would be fine. But that shift is being set up as a rather dramatic increase in the overall tax burden. It hides the tax increase by it says, well, we got to cut here and a raise there. The problem is, over time, it's about $500 million in higher taxes with that shift alone. The good part of the governor's plan is he spends more money from general funds on transportation. Be nice if it was on roads. Remember, when somebody says transportation, what they really mean is they're siphoning money off for Metro and they're siphoning money off for light rail. If they meant roads, they'd say roads. When they say transportation, they use that term to hide from you that the money is not going to roads, it's going to something else. So watch your politicians when they promise to spend money on transportation, you may be getting bike paths when you thought you were getting more roads.
Now, Mr. Norquist, you are a relatively controversial figure, particularly in Democratic circles. Are you concerned at all that maybe your opposition to this plan would maybe encourage some Democrats to support the plan and have kind of a reverse effect? I know that you've had quite a number of people sign on to your Americans for Tax Reform pledge in the Republican Party here. Some of them support this plan. How do you think your role in this entire debate could impact the final outcome?
Well, Americans for Tax Reform, the group that I organize, is against any and all net tax increases. We're for tax reform to make taxes more efficient, more transparent, but against tax increases. So when you say that some Democrats don't like the Taxpayer Protection Pledge or Americans for Tax Reform or me, you're stating the obvious, is that the reason to join the modern Democrat Party in Virginia or at the national level is because you believe in higher taxes and higher spending. People who want higher taxes will love the Senate's $4 billion tax increase, and they might even like the governor's plan with about $2 to $3 billion of tax increases. Unfortunately, both plans, the governor's plan, which is not as big, and the Democrats' plan, which is a huge tax increase, even bigger than the governor's, if you want higher taxes, these plans will give it to you. If you want roads, they won't.
Will there be repercussions for some of the folks that have supported your pledge, who have been supportive of one of these two plans in the upcoming election? Will your group get involved in some of those races for people who've said that they support your plan and then have come back and voted in favor of something that you're not in favor of?
Yeah. Well, the good news is that the pledge is not to me or to Americans for Tax Reform. The pledge is to the people of Virginia. And any elected official who promised the people of Virginia that if they deserved and asked for and deserved and got the vote of the people of Virginia, that they would oppose tax increases, it's probably not a good idea to support a tax hike if you promised people differently. And some Democrats who sound in campaigns as if they wouldn't raise your taxes, I think will disappoint a lot of voters, even if they didn't sign the pledge. If you weren't up front with people saying that you were going to pass a massive tax increase to do a bunch of stuff other than roads, you may find voters less enthusiastic about you if you vote for one of the versions of this tax increase plan that's a lot of taxes and very little, if any, roads.
Now, finally, let me ask you about Governor McDonnell specifically. He's been among those resistant to sign on to your pledge. He's obviously in disagreement with you on this particular plan. Now, if he considers a run for higher office, perhaps president, which he's been rumored to be thinking about, would you and your group use this against him in a future political campaign?
Well, Americans for Tax Reform is not necessary. I mean, if the governor continues to push a tax increase in Virginia, what party would he run for president for? There are 30 Republican governors. The Republicans in North Carolina are phasing out their income tax. In Louisiana, Governor Jindal's abolishing his income tax. Brownback of Kansas is abolishing their income tax. Virginia's raising taxes. You don't get to run for president as a Republican with 30 Republican governors, most of whom, Ohio's cutting the income tax, Indiana's cutting the income tax, Wisconsin's is cutting the income tax. You have all sorts of governors cutting taxes and building roads because they prioritize roads. I don't think you can compete with that with raising taxes in order to not build roads.
All right. Grover Norquist joining us from Washington from the Americans for Tax Reform. Sir, we appreciate your time.
Sure thing.